Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The simple fact is that universities and students need these regulations to be implemented. I'm not sure the Honourable Lady opposite mentioned the content of the SI once in her remarks. They are transitional. The regulations are entirely sensible and intended to fill the regulatory gap which has been left following the abolition of the Higher Education Funding Council for England earlier this month. They enable the Office for Students and UK Research and Innovation to take on the statutory functions of the Higher Education Funding Council for England and the Director of Fair Access to Higher Education between now and July next year, after which the new regulatory system will be functioning. And given the Honourable Lady spent her opening speech talking about the details of the OFS, I should clarify, because it's fairly obvious that their opposition to this proposal isn't actually about this SI at all. Labour have been vocal about their reservations on the Office for Students. That's fine, but voting down this bill won't change that. It will just wreck the regulation of universities for the next 15 months. There will be students in the end that will suffer as a result. This is about the transition. It's a very dry SI on process. It's not about what we're transitioning to, a decision that's already been taken. And Labour's opposition to this SI is therefore totally misjudged. It's almost as if they've seen the words higher education on a piece of legislation and thought we can bash the Tories on this subject. As I've said, if these regulations are annulled, it will ultimately be students who will lose out. They'll no longer have the vital protections in place to address concerns about governance, quality or financial sustainability in their education. They could face increased fees because it's only these transitional arrangements that ensure that a cap remains in place on student fees. And the opposition has talked repeatedly about... I will give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. My understanding is that the Office for Students is supposed to protect the interests of students. Right. Yep. One of the things that students are most concerned by is that whereas the Bank of England is charging to bankers 0.5% on loans, yep, next year the student loans company is going to charge students over 6%. Does the Office for Students have the powers to cut that interest rate in the interest of students?
If you want. I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, but again, totally misunderstanding this particular legislation. It's not about the Office for Students or their powers. It's not about the Office for Students or their powers. The government has launched a review of higher education funding to find out whether or not that's something that we can or should do, and that's very important going forward, but that's not what this is about. That's right. The opposition has talked repeatedly about standing up for students, continually claiming to be the voice of students and discussing their plans to abolish tuition fees, yet here they are actually risking the cap on tuition fees by opposing these regulations. Let's not forget they don't actually have the strongest record on keeping promises on education. Before the election, Jeremy Corbyn said he would deal with existing student debt, and then afterwards told Andrew Marr that actually he didn't make that commitment, he wasn't going to write it off, he was unaware of the size of the debt, making promises without knowing the full facts and ultimately realising he can't deliver it. They talk about tuition fees preventing people from going to university. The truth is that under this government, more disadvantaged 18-year-olds are going to university than ever before. Students from a disadvantaged background are 50% more likely to attend university in 2017 than they were in 2009 under Labour. And our results on this kind of social mobility compare pretty favourably with other countries like Scotland, where higher education is free. I will go on.
I thank my honourable friend. As somebody who went to university, the first one in the family to go to university, myself, and I didn't go until I was age 40 while fighting the campaign, would you, my honourable friend, agree that by having the Office for Students, something that matters as a mature student myself, who I was, teaching quality is what's important to us. So by having the Office for Students, this will help improve teaching quality.
Thank my honourable friend for her intervention. She's absolutely right. What this legislation does ensure is that we have that regulation from the Office for Students over the next 15 months, and not just this massive gap in regulation until we get to the middle of next year. The irony is, Mr Speaker, that Labour's position on tuition fees is actually the least socialist idea I think I've ever heard in my life. They ignore figures that I've just shared, say that universities don't take enough students from poorer backgrounds. They're for the rich, but despite those assumptions, they propose raising taxes to fund free universities.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that it was those sat on the opposite bench who actually brought the tuition fees in the first place?
Thank my honourable friend. That's a very fair point to make. Based on Labour's own logic, they propose raising taxes on poorer people who don't get the benefit of higher education in order to fund free higher education for rich people. The opposite of socialism, the opposite of social mobility, another totally illogical giveaway that looks nice on a leaflet but is actually totally illogical and undeliverable. I'm going to crack on and finish. I'm nearly done. Moving on from fees. Without this agreement, there's a risk universities won't receive crucial grant funding. These transitional regulations enable the OFS to allocate 1.3 billion of teaching grants. Without this, there's no means to give out those grants. Without this legislation, there is no provision to offer access agreements to support those disadvantaged students in the next academic year. Now, I understand the opposition have reservations about the way the OFS board has been set up and appointments to that board, but this is not the right place to raise those issues. Those decisions have already been made. The actions risk creating a regulatory gap in the higher education sector.
Order! The honourable gentleman must be heard. It's no use if everybody's shouting at him, because then we can't hear what he's saying. Mr. Bradley.
One line left. I'm nearly there, Madam Deputy Speaker. Their actions risking a regulatory gap in the higher education sector and uncertainty for students and universities, and ultimately it's this uncertainty we're trying to avoid, and that's why I'm supporting the government.